أفحكم الجاهلية يبغون ومن أحسن من الله حكما لقوم يوقنون.
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له وما يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وبعد. خير الحديث كتاب الله وخير الحدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. The topic Islam and democracy is without doubt in this day and age a topic that is inevitably going to be controversial. But there is a clue already in what I have just said, that it doesn't need to be a controversial topic, at least certainly for Muslims. Because if we were to transpose ourselves to another time, another era, then the topic would not be one of concern. The concept of democracy did not even exist, except in history, where a small state in Greece practiced a form of governance which was known by the philosophers of the time as democracy. And it is very interesting to note that a number of Greek philosophers themselves considered democracy to be an unbefitting and weak and corrupt form of governance. In fact, one of the great Greek philosophers said that one of the major problems with democracy was that the leader would always have to pamper to the desires and the whims of the people in order to gain their support. And thus a leader would not be able to take the firm, decisive and conclusive decisions, and a leader would not be able to take the morally sound decisions that a leader should. Because by doing so, he would have to contradict the opinion of the masses, he would lose their support, and therefore would not be able to continue his position as a leader. Even then, those many hundreds of years ago, the Greek philosophers had already expounded and discussed some of the weaknesses and the deficiencies of this system. And it is only relatively recent history that this idea of democracy has been reinvented and reintroduced, and has been spread mostly by, first of all, Britain, or perhaps to be fair, perhaps first of all France, and then Britain and America, this concept of democracy as the ideal form of human governance, the ideal way through which and by which human beings should govern their affairs. Now, I would first of all like to add to that, beware of allowing ourselves and allowing the agenda to be set by the non-Muslims for us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentioned in His book, the meaning of which is, whoever contends with the messenger and chooses a path other than the path of the believers, then Allah will leave them in the path they have chosen and land them in hell. What an evil refuge. And the Prophet ﷺ said, when he gave a khutbah, he gave a sermon, and the companions began, their hearts were moved, and they began to cry, and they began to feel as if the Prophet ﷺ was saying goodbye to them, as if it was a farewell sermon. So one of them stood up and said, "O Messenger of Allah, it seems to us as if this is a farewell sermon, so advise us." They were waiting, hoping for some precious piece of advice from the Prophet ﷺ, that if he was to leave them at that moment, there would be something they could hang on to. And so these were the words of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, "I advise you to fear Allah. I advise you to fear Allah and to hear and obey your Amir, even if he is an Abyssinian slave." He said, "After me, you will see great differing. You will see great ikhtilaf, great differing." So he said, "Cling to my sunnah and the sunnah of the Khulafa ar-Rashideen, the rightly guided successors, and bite it with your molar teeth. Bite it, and beware of the newly invented matters in the religion." He didn't just say cling to my sunnah, but he also mentioned the sunnah of the Khulafa ar-Rashideen, the rightly guided successors, which means, of course, first and foremost Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and then Umar ibn al-Khattab, and Uthman ibn Affan, and Ali ibn Talib. These first and foremost are the Khulafa ar-Rashideen. And of course the house of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which includes his wife Aisha and Fatima. These are the ones the Prophet told us to hang on to their example. When we see differing, we must always refer it back to Allah and His Messenger. Not our whims, not our opinions, not our desires, not our intellect. When we have a disagreement about anything, we must refer it back to Allah and His Messenger.
وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ وَإِلَى الرَّسُولِ قالوا حسبنا ما وجدنا عليه آباءنا أولو كان آباؤهم لا يعلمون شيئا ولا يهتدون.
So the very essence of Islam, the very essence of what Islam means, istislam, to submit, to surrender to the will of Allah, obedience to Allah and His commands. This is the very essence of what Islam means. That is why the saying of the believers is always Sami'na wa ata'na. We hear and we obey.